Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. Ridgel Maddox never wanted trouble. He just wanted to build his dream home, his own land, his own rules. But when a powerful HOA set its sights on him, that dream became a battleground. They tried threats, sabotage, even the law itself. What they didn't know? Ridgel wasn't the kind of man to back down. Ridgel Maddox had always been drawn to the idea of building his own home. Growing up, his parents took him on long road trips across the western states, where he marveled at the vast open landscapes, the scattered homesteads standing defiantly against nature, and the quiet independence that came with owning a piece of land far from the constraints of city living. His parents, though fond of the same scenery, had chosen a different path, settling in a typical suburban neighborhood where uniform houses line neatly paved streets. Ridgel never blamed them for their choice, but deep down he knew he was destined for something else. The moment he had the financial means, he vowed to make his dream a reality. After years of saving and careful planning, he found what seemed like the perfect spot, a generous stretch of land on the outskirts of a small town in Colorado. The property was exactly what he had envisioned: rolling hills, a breathtaking view of the mountains, and just enough distance from the nearest town to offer solitude without complete isolation. The land wasn't cheap, but it was worth every penny. More importantly, his legal research confirmed that it was free from the grasp of any homeowners association, HOA. This was non-negotiable for Ridgel. He had heard enough horror stories about HOAs dictating everything from mailbox colors to the height of grass, and he had no interest in handing over control of his own land to a group of overzealous enforcers. The real estate documents made it clear his property was outside of any HOA jurisdiction. He made sure to triple-check the deed, consult the county records, and even ask the seller directly. Everything confirmed what he wanted to hear. He would be free to build his home exactly as he saw fit, without interference. With that peace of mind, he finalized the purchase and began planning. The following months were filled with excitement as he sketched out his vision for the house. He wanted a structure that felt both modern and timeless, something sturdy, practical, but with an undeniable sense of personality. He wasn't just building a house, he was creating a legacy, something that would stand the test of time and reflect the independence he had worked so hard to achieve. With his plan set, Ridgel hired John Harker, a trusted contractor with a solid reputation. John was no-nonsense, experienced, and, most importantly, uninterested in cutting corners. Together, they worked through the blueprints, discussing everything from the foundation to the type of wood that would frame the house. Construction began smoothly, and with each passing week, Ridgel could see his dream taking shape. During one of his visits to the construction site, he met a few of his new neighbors. Most were friendly enough. Lucille Foster, an elderly woman from down the road, brought him a homemade pie and welcomed him to the area. Edward Holt, who owned a large ranch nearby, struck up a conversation about the history of the land. It was during this exchange that Ridgel first heard about Bear Valley HOA, a name that would soon become synonymous with trouble. "Those folks run the neighborhood by the lake," Edward said, leaning against his truck. "Real particular about how things look over there. They've caused a lot of headaches for people who don't play by their rules." Ridgel frowned. "I was told my property isn't part of that." Edward gave him a knowing look. "If that's what the paperwork says, you should be fine. Just keep an eye on them. They don't always play fair." At the time, Ridgel brushed off the warning. He had done his research. His property was outside of the HOA's reach, and he had no reason to believe otherwise. He was confident that his dream home would be built without interference. He was wrong. The early stages of construction were filled with a sense of exhilaration. Every morning, Ridgel would drive to his property, watching as the foundation was laid, the wooden framework rising against the backdrop of the mountains. It was more than just a house taking shape. It was the physical embodiment of his years of planning, saving, and determination. The smell of fresh-cut lumber and the rhythmic sounds of hammers striking nails filled the air. John Harker and his crew worked efficiently, keeping everything on schedule. Ridgel took an active role in the process, spending time on site, reviewing materials, and discussing adjustments with John. He wanted every detail to be perfect, from the orientation of the house to capture the best views to the way the windows framed the sunrise. It was an exciting, hands-on experience, and he felt deeply invested in every decision. It wasn't long before he started to notice the subtle presence of Bear Valley HOA. It began with curious onlookers, neighbors who slowed their cars as they passed by or lingered a little too long at the edge of his property, watching the construction. At first, he thought nothing of it. People were naturally interested when something new was being built, and he dismissed it as small-town curiosity. One afternoon, Lucille Foster stopped by again, this time with a tin of cookies. As they chatted, she casually mentioned that some of the folks over by the lake had been asking questions about his house. "They're wondering what kind of place you're putting up," she said, hesitating slightly before adding, "and whether it meets community standards." Ridgel scoffed. "It's my land. I can build whatever I want." Lucille gave him a sympathetic smile. "I know that, dear, but the HOA folks, they like to think they run everything around here." Later that week, Edward Holt dropped by, shaking his head in amusement. "You've got their attention, all right. Heard from a buddy that the HOA board had a little discussion about your place. Seems they're not too pleased that you're building without their oversight." Ridgel felt an uneasy prickle of irritation. He wasn't doing anything wrong. His land was private, free from any HOA control. If they were not pleased, that was their problem, not his. But then, the first real sign of trouble arrived. One morning, as John's crew prepared to start work for the day, a man in a crisp polo shirt and slacks showed up unannounced. He introduced himself as Derek Slater, a representative of Bear Valley HOA. His demeanor was polished but firm, the kind of confidence that came from people who were used to being obeyed. "Mr. Maddox," he said smoothly, "we've been reviewing the developments in this area, and we noticed your construction. We wanted to make sure everything is up to community standards." Ridgel crossed his arms. "I'm not part of your HOA." Derek gave him a patronizing smile. "Well, that's what we're here to clarify. You see, Bear Valley HOA has long been responsible for maintaining the quality of the neighborhood, even in areas adjacent to our official boundaries. We have certain guidelines in place to ensure consistency." John Harker, standing nearby, let out a short laugh. "This guy serious?" Ridgel narrowed his eyes. "Let me be crystal clear. My property is not under your HOA. I did my research. I bought this land specifically because I didn't want to deal with people telling me how to build my own house." Derek's smile didn't fade, but his eyes sharpened. "I understand your perspective, Mr. Maddox. However, we strongly encourage you to consider joining Bear Valley HOA. It would make things easier." Ridgel took a step closer, his patience wearing thin. "Easier for who?" Derek tilted his head slightly. "For everyone involved." With that, he handed Ridgel a brochure titled Bear Valley HOA, a community of excellence, nodded politely, and walked away, leaving a lingering air of unspoken warning. Ridgel clenched his jaw. Something told him this was just the beginning. At first, Ridgel tried to shake off the encounter with Derek Slater. He had no obligation to the Bear Valley HOA, and they had no legal authority over his land. If they thought they could intimidate him into compliance, they were sorely mistaken. Still, the encounter left a bad taste in his mouth. He had expected to deal with construction delays, bad weather, or supply chain issues, not an overreaching homeowners association trying to extend its control beyond its rightful borders. But within a few days, strange inconveniences began piling up. The first issue arose when the water delivery for his construction site was suddenly canceled. He had arranged for a local service to supply water for concrete mixing and worker use. But when John's crew went to refill their tanks, they were told their order had been delayed due to administrative issues. Ridgel called the company, and after some back and forth, the dispatcher reluctantly admitted that they had received a call from a community authority warning them that Ridgel's construction site was under pending review. That same afternoon, his contractor, John Harker, approached him with a sour expression. "We just hit another roadblock," he said, arms crossed. "The power company says they need HOA approval before they can set up your temporary electrical connection." Ridgel felt his stomach tighten. "That's bullshit. My property isn't under any HOA," John nodded. "That's what I told them. They just said it was policy and that I'd have to sort it out before they could move forward." Furious, Ridgel got on the phone with the utility company. After being bounced between departments, he finally spoke to a manager who confirmed what John had said. Normally, properties outside HOA control don't need association approval, the woman admitted. But we've received formal notice from Bear Valley HOA claiming jurisdiction over your lot. Until that's resolved, we can't proceed. Ridgel gripped his phone tightly, his knuckles turning white. That's completely false. I have legal documentation proving that my land is not under their authority. The woman hesitated. I understand, sir, but until we get written clarification, we can't override their claim. Ridgel knew exactly what was happening. The HOA wasn't just suggesting. He joined. They were actively blocking his access to essential services, hoping he'd cave under the pressure. Later that evening, his neighbor, Edward Holt, stopped by. I heard what happened with the power company, he said, shaking his head. Looks like they're tightening the screws. Ridgel exhaled sharply. They're trying to bully me into joining. Edward's face darkened. That's how they operate. When I expanded my barn a few years ago, they tried to fine me for exceeding permitted structure dimensions, except my land isn't in their damn HOA. I fought them, but it took months. They rely on people giving up. Ridgel's jaw clenched. They picked the wrong guy to mess with. As the sun set over his half-built home, Ridgel realized that Bear Valley HOA wasn't just overstepping their boundaries. They were declaring war. Ridgel had no intention of playing along with Bear Valley HOA's games. If they thought they could pressure him into submission with bureaucratic roadblocks, they were in for a fight. The next morning, he drove straight to the HOA's office, a pristine, modern-looking building near the lake. Inside, the reception area was sleek and polished, designed to radiate authority. A woman at the front desk barely looked up from her computer. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked in a bored tone. "No, but I need to speak with whoever sent the fraudulent claim to the power company about my property," Ridgel said, his voice steady but firm. Before the receptionist could respond, a door to the side opened, and Margaret Dorn, the HOA president, stepped into the room. Tall, impeccably dressed, with the cold confidence of someone used to getting her way, she gave Ridgel a slow, assessing glance. "Mr. Maddox," she said, as if she had been expecting him, "I was wondering when you'd come in." Ridgel crossed his arms. "Then you know why I'm here. You sent false information to the power company claiming jurisdiction over my land. That needs to be corrected immediately." Margaret's expression didn't flicker. "It's not false," she said smoothly. "Your property falls within Bear Valley's future expansion zone. It's in the community's best interest that all residents adhere to our guidelines." Ridgel let out a sharp laugh. "Future expansion zone? That's rich. My property deed says otherwise." Margaret gave a polite, condescending smile. "It's understandable that you're upset, but the HOA's role is to maintain the integrity and aesthetics of the neighborhood. We're simply ensuring that all homes built in the area meet our high standards." Ridgel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Cut the corporate talk. You're blocking my utilities to force me into your HOA." Margaret's expression hardened just slightly. "We have policies, Mr. Maddox, policies that ensure order. If you choose to be cooperative, we can make this process much easier for you." Ridgel held her gaze, unflinching. "I don't cooperate with extortionists." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then I suppose this will be more difficult than necessary." Ridgel didn't waste another second in that office. He stormed out, gripping his phone as he made his next call to his lawyer, Sloan Bailey. "Sounds like they're pushing hard," Sloan said after he filled her in. "They have no legal grounds, but they're banking on intimidation tactics. First, we send them a formal cease and desist. Then we take it to court if they push back." "Good," Ridgel said, "because I don't intend to let them get away with this." But the HOA wasn't done yet. That evening, when Ridgel returned to his construction site, he found his driveway blocked by orange traffic cones and a sign that read, "Private Road. No access without HO permit." John Harker, his contractor, was already there, pacing angrily. "They just did this an hour ago," he said. "Some HOA rep came by with a clipboard, told my guys that without proper authorization, we can't use the road for construction deliveries." Ridgel clenched his fists. "This is beyond illegal." He turned on his truck's high beams and, without hesitation, got out and kicked the cones out of the way, sending them rolling into the dirt. Then he grabbed the sign, yanked it out of the ground, and tossed it onto the side of the road. His crew cheered. John chuckled. "Damn right." But Ridgel knew this was just the beginning. Bear Valley HOA had escalated their tactics. Now it was war. The next morning, Ridgel woke up to a new level of hostility. A certified letter from Bear Valley HOA had arrived at his temporary rental in town. The envelope was thick, official-looking, stamped with the association seal. Inside, Margaret Dorn's name was boldly printed at the top of a formal notice. Cease and desist order. According to the letter, Ridgel's construction site was in violation of community aesthetic standards and was therefore subject to an immediate work stoppage. Further down, it stated that if he did not formally register as a Bear Valley HOA member within 7 days, he would be subject to ongoing penalties, including denied access to shared roads, restrictions on property utilities, and potential legal action. Ridgel let out a short, humorless laugh. They weren't even trying to hide their extortion anymore. Before heading to the site, he called his lawyer, Sloan Bailey, and read the letter to her over the phone. "That's textbook illegal," she said immediately. "They have zero jurisdiction over your land, and they damn well know it. This is pure intimidation. I'll draft an emergency injunction request and have it in court by tomorrow morning." Ridgel felt a surge of relief. Good, because I'm not playing their game. At the construction site, his crew was on edge. The power company had refused to install the temporary electrical connection, citing community authorization issues. Without power, his workers couldn't run the most of their equipment. "This is some next-level bullshit," John Harker muttered. "Never seen an HOA pull something like this before." Ridgel exhaled sharply. "I'm not letting them stop us." He had two immediate solutions in mind. First, he called in a favor from Edward Holt, his rancher neighbor, who helped him rent a massive industrial generator, enough to power the site for the next few weeks. It wasn't cheap, but it kept construction moving. Second, he drove back to the HOA office, this time with a folder containing his property deed, county records, and the cease and desist letter. He wasn't going to let them control the narrative. Inside, Margaret Dorn was waiting for him, her usual smug expression in place. "Mr. Maddox," she said smoothly, "I assume you're here to discuss your compliance options." Ridgel placed the letter on her desk and slid it toward her. "I'm here to tell you to back off. This letter, it's illegal. My property is outside your jurisdiction, and you damn well know it." Margaret barely glanced at the letter. "We enforce policies that benefit the entire community. It's unfortunate that you seem so resistant." Ridgel leaned forward. "You're blocking my utilities. That's not enforcement. That's coercion. And I have a lawyer filing an injunction first thing tomorrow." Margaret's expression flickered for just a second, a crack in her carefully curated confidence. "That won't be necessary," she said, though her voice was noticeably tighter. "We simply need to ensure compliance with community standards." Ridgel smirked. "Yeah? Then go ahead and put it in writing. Officially admit that you're withholding essential services until I sign your little membership form." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "I don't think that will be necessary." "Didn't think so," Ridgel said, standing up. "I'll let the judge handle it." As he left the office, he felt something shift. Margaret and her HOA cronies had been playing a game of power, assuming he would bend under the pressure. But now, the fight was heading to the courtroom, and Ridgel was ready. The very next day, Ridgel's lawyer, Sloan Bailey, filed an emergency injunction request against Bear Valley HOA, citing illegal interference, property rights violations, and unlawful denial of essential services. The hearing was set for the following week, and while that was a victory in itself, the HOA wasn't about to go down without a fight. Margaret Dorn and her board escalated their tactics overnight. That same evening, Ridgel arrived at his construction site to find that his generator had been tampered with. The fuel line had been deliberately cut, causing a spill across the dirt. John Harker, already at the site, stood fuming next to the damaged equipment. "This wasn't an accident," John growled. "Somebody did this on purpose." Ridgel clenched his jaw. "I know exactly who." But that wasn't all. The next morning, Ridgel woke up to 3 new violations taped to his rental's door, all stamped with the Bear Valley HOA insignia. Unauthorized construction in a managed area, improper waste disposal from building materials, failure to register a private structure with the HOA committee. It was absurd. His land wasn't in their jurisdiction, and he had proper permits for everything. But they were making it clear. They weren't just trying to block him, they were trying to bury him in red tape. The final straw came when he received a formal letter threatening a lien on his property, claiming he owed outstanding community fees for infrastructure maintenance. A total fabrication. Furious, he immediately sent copies to Sloan. "They're getting desperate," she said. "And that's good for us. These threats are all documented proof of their harassment." The day of the court hearing arrived, and Ridgel walked into the courthouse with Sloan by his side. Margaret Dorn was already seated at the defendant's table, flanked by 2 HOA board members and their attorney, a sharp-suited man who looked like he spent most of his time intimidating homeowners into compliance. The hearing wasn't a full trial, but it was enough to determine whether the HOA had acted unlawfully in blocking Ridgel's utilities and interfering with his construction. Sloan laid out the evidence masterfully. County property records proving Ridgel's land was outside HOA boundaries. The official letter from the HOA stating they would deny utilities unless he joined. The fabricated violation notices and threats of a lien. Then came the biggest moment, when the judge turned to Margaret Dorn directly. "Mrs. Dorn," the judge said, his tone calm but firm, "did your association send this letter stating that Mr. Maddox would be denied utilities unless he joined?" Margaret hesitated for the first time. "We, Bear Valley HOA, reserve the right to ensure community standards are upheld." The judge's gaze didn't waver. "That's not what I asked. Did you, or did you not, send this letter?" Margaret glanced toward her attorney, but there was no escape. "Yes," she finally admitted. The judge nodded, flipping through the documents. Then, with clear irritation, he said, "This HOA has clearly overstepped its legal boundaries. Effective immediately, the plaintiff's utilities must be restored, and the association is barred from further interference." A first massive victory, but Ridgel wasn't done yet, because after everything they had put him through, he wanted more than just access to power. He wanted justice, and the real fight was just beginning. Winning the injunction was a major blow to Bear Valley HOA, but Ridgel wasn't satisfied with just getting his utilities back. Margaret Dorn and her board had spent months trying to sabotage his construction, extort him into membership, and trample on his rights. He wasn't going to let them walk away unscathed. The lawsuit moved forward, this time focusing on damages and compensation. With the court officially recognizing that Bear Valley HOA had no jurisdiction over his land, their entire case began to unravel. The discovery process unearthed internal emails between Margaret and her board members, discussing their attempts to expand their influence and bring unclaimed properties into the fold. One particularly damning email showed that they had budgeted projected income from Ridgel's membership fees before he even bought the land. They had assumed he would just comply without question, that he would roll over like so many others had before. That assumption had cost them dearly. Margaret's attorney offered a settlement, hoping to end things quietly, but Ridgel, with Sloan's guidance, pushed for more. Not just financial restitution, but also a formal admission of wrongdoing from the HOA. If they wanted this lawsuit to go away, they needed to pay for the damage they caused and publicly acknowledge their abuse of power. Faced with mounting legal fees, public scrutiny, and a judge who had no patience for their nonsense, Bear Valley HOA caved. The final settlement was far beyond what Ridgel had initially expected. Not only did they pay for all his extra construction costs, including the industrial generator he had been forced to rent, but they also covered his legal fees and punitive damages for their harassment. The total payout was well into 6 figures. And then came the most satisfying part. Margaret Dorn resigned. There was no grand announcement, no defiant speech. Just a brief notice from the HOA stating that she was stepping down to focus on personal matters. But everyone knew the truth. She had been forced out. After her departure, the HOA underwent massive restructuring. The new leadership, likely fearing another lawsuit, rolled back dozens of unfair policies. Homeowners who had been bullied for years suddenly found themselves free to make simple changes to their homes without HOA interference. Edward Holt finally repainted his barn the color he actually wanted. Lucille Foster expanded her flower garden without fear of fines. Other residents started pushing back against arbitrary restrictions. The fear that had once kept people in line was gone. For Ridgel, the victory was more than just personal. It was a message, not just to Bear Valley HOA, but to every overreaching homeowners association that thought it could bully people into compliance. On the day he finally moved into his finished home, he hosted a housewarming party. Edward brought steaks, Lucille arrived with a basket of fresh vegetables, and even some former HOA members who had secretly supported his fight stopped by, eager to celebrate the change in the community. As the sun set over the mountains, Rigel stood on his porch, looking over his land, the land he had fought for and won. No HOA would ever take that from him.